Okay, welcome everyone to tonight's Wisdom Dharma Chats. Thank you for joining me. We have a special guest tonight, and I'm going to now introduce Eva Natanya. Eva is a scholar of Indian and Tibetan Buddhism, Christian theology, and comparative religion. Um, Eva had a career as a professional ballet in the Royal Ballet of England and the New York City Ballet. She has a PhD in religious studies from the University of Virginia, and she spent more than 4 years in solitary meditation retreat, and is the co-founder of the Center for Contemplative Research, and is also the resident teacher of the Mio Samten Ling Hermitage in Crestone, Colorado. So Eva, thank you for joining us tonight. And just waiting for So while we're waiting for Eva, she was there. There she is.
I am
Welcome.
here.
And
Thank you.
importantly, the worked with Lama Alan Wallace on these translations and to bring this book into being that has recently been published with Wisdom Publications. We're so proud of it. This will be part 2 of the conversation on this book, and this really is an incredible book. And incredible translations and such a vast array of wisdom from such a long time span from all different traditions. And so I was wondering how you got roped into this huge project.
Uh, well, for those of you listening who don't know, I've actually been working closely with Lama Alan on several different books, going back to 2016,
Mm.
when I had gone to a retreat with him in Santa Barbara and asked some questions, actually comparing the view of Guya Samaja to Dzogchen. And so then we had a few email exchanges after that retreat, and he invited me to start looking at this what became part 2 of Open Mind,
Yeah.
the comparison, these series of amazing essays on the old and new translation schools. Uh, and so we worked together closely eventually on the whole of Open Mind, the book by that title, which is also an anthology of sorts. It has quite a few different works in it. And then we worked together on the book Fathoming the Mind the following year. And I had already gone into solitary retreat in 2017 by the time both of those books were published. There was just a little bit of work finished. So in a way, that began a rhythm that has varied over the years. But at some level, my retreat has always been nourished
Mm.
by some kind of work with translation in collaboration with Lama Alan. And so this has just been a great blessing to me, um, because retreat, I can say more about this later maybe, but it requires staying power, and it requires a continuous source of inspiration. Um, and I think Lama Alan has known that for me as his disciple, as his student, that because of my predilection or my interest in translation, my love of the Tibetan language, the way that hanging on words of Tibetan, it brings tears to my eyes, just hanging on the words of a certain verse or a certain passage and thinking through the grammar over and over and over again until it crystallizes. That is, it's really a kind of guru yoga for me. A
Wow. Yeah.
devotional practice in which sometimes I feel almost like more vivid blessings coming through that work of working with a text.
Mm.
Um, and of course, it's the seeking to understand it. Bringing it into English is only secondary. If one understands it, then the English will flow naturally. Um, but the process of dwelling with certain passages through practice has been immensely nourishing for me over the years. So that's the long story short of that. Um, but by 2023, Lama Alan and I had already collaborated to found the Center for Contemplative Research in Crestone, as you mentioned. And so just a quick overview. I had done solitary retreat pretty much from mid 2017 after I finished my PhD through 2020 when the pandemic hit.
Yes.
And then these amazing circumstances came together for us to found the center, to acquire that land. And then I went back into solitary retreat for a short time, but then just circumstances meant I needed to take on an administrative role. And so that was a whole aspect of myself that I had not engaged before in this life, but I figured it out. So that was about a year and a half. But then I'd gone back into retreat quite strictly in the beginning of 2023, and that's when Lama Alan had also begun his own long-term retreat at first at another house in Crestone, and then eventually at Myosamtenling. And as Lama Alan mentions in the preface to Śamatha and Vipaśanā, now coming to our present volume, it was a sheer inspiration. One day in his retreat, there are all these texts that are sort of floating and they haven't been published yet. Some of them he taught whole retreats on, but that's not the same as having it ready in the public domain for people to study and benefit from. And when I saw the compilation of texts that he'd put together, I knew, oh, the immense value of every single one of these. But I admit I also knew it wasn't a book yet, because it was a series of texts that would have taken quite a lot of explanation to have it hang together as an anthology. So, and I also knew that even though I had worked with a number of those texts in the past, I mean, editing them while in retreat, even before Lama Alan had taught some short retreats through the Santa Barbara Institute in 2020. So I'd worked with the Atisha text, for example, before, but I had that sense of these need a lot more refinement before they're ready for publication. And so I was very honest with Lama Alan about that. Of course, we have an extremely open collaborative relationship. It's like, I sometimes feel like it's two monks on a debate ground and just, okay, let's get to the bottom of this. And I don't even remember what came next in terms of starting to work on the text, starting to review the texts. But we also had the wonderful help of Virginia Kraft, who worked on the book
Virginia.
and she'd already had some excellent input on the structure of the book. But it really was then gradual as we polished the texts to send to you, basically, to be ready for, okay, this is the book. But what evolved the following year in 2024, through our work with your team at Wisdom, was realizing these texts need introductions. And so that was a point, again, I was in pretty deep retreat at that time. And then when that suggestion came, I knew there's kind of nobody else to do that for these particular texts, who understands Lama Alan's perspective on the translation of them, and it would keep it in the flow of that style. So I stepped in to start writing introductions. And as I say, I don't actually remember now when we made the decision to start adding the works by Lama Tsakapa. But that was very dear to my heart. And that section, as readers will see, I had almost even more of a role in. Well, I'll finish the one thought, which is that I did end up, Virginia had already done some wonderful work in developing biographies of each of the authors. And then we decided to integrate those biographies into the actual introductions. So then that was my work to write these introductions and do quite a bit of historical research, especially on Jo Atisha and the Sakyapas, and Lama Tsokapa I was much more familiar with, but benefited so much from reading Thupten Jinpa's.
Oh yes, that's brilliant, that biography.
Buddha in the Land of Snows, I believe it is. But these works from Lama Tsokapa, actually, I have a long personal history with each of them. The text on the union of Śamatha and Vipaśanā is something that one of my professors and advisors at the University of Virginia actually first invited me to try working on
Was it Curtis or who was it?
It was either, at this moment, I'm suddenly drawing a blank. I believe it was Curtis Schaefer. So I worked
Yeah.
extensively with David Germano and with Curtis Schaefer,
Yeah.
and they worked in collaboration a great deal
Yeah.
for all their Tibetan Buddhist graduate students. Um, but I believe it was Curtis
Mm.
who suggested, because the section that is, and this isn't a footnote, but it's worth explaining. It's a section on the union of shamatha and vipassana from the middle length, or the
Yeah.
concise presentation of the steps of the path. Uh, Lama Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Dring as opposed to
Mm.
Lamrim
Yeah.
Chamo. And Lama Alan had actually translated the whole shamatha section in the book that's now Balancing the Mind.
Yeah.
And actually, I later discovered that Jeffrey Hopkins had included this section in his book, The Final Exposition of Wisdom.
Yeah.
Um, but because it's kind of distinct from the shamatha and the vipassana section, this unification of shamatha and vipassana, I'm quite sure it was Curtis who suggested that I translate it. So I did it as part of a class. I actually remember giving a lecture on it to 200 some odd undergraduates.
Mm.
Um, and then I think I refined it a bit later, yeah, just for practice sake, for other retreatants. And then when I came back to it for the sake of this book, I realized basically I needed to start all over again, because there's a clarity to the translation system. That's really, I want to say, that Lama Alan has developed over the years, and then a lot of which we have continued to refine in these years of collaboration together, and especially for the 3 volumes of Dijum Lingpa's Visions,
Yeah.
um, that we're still working on certain terminology. But I knew that if that translation was going to fit into this book of Shamatha and Vipassana, it
Had to
needed
come
to
into the
fit.
system. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd had a very different set of vocabulary in a way
Mm.
of my translation system back in 2012 or 13, whenever I had done that first draft. So that's the history, just personally, behind that text. Um, it's pivotal for the volume
Mm.
because it's so explicitly, in the language of Lama Tsongkhapa, shows that shamatha and vipassana, they're not simply practices that you develop either sequentially and then leave the one behind and go on to the other, and they're not practices that you alternate, shamatha and vipassana. And this is completely in keeping with the Mahayana Sutra tradition. He's citing Mahayana Sutras, but then also
Mm.
Kamala Shila, Ratnakara Shanti, these great
Yeah.
Indian pundits, as his source for it's a kind of meditation in which the two are actually unified in a stream.
Mm.
Um, and there's clarity there on the difference between just joining a mind that has developed a good basis of stillness and is
Yeah.
then doing some analysis on the basis of that stillness, which
Yeah.
could be like a collection of shamatha and vipassana.
Hmm.
But he's quite explicit. That's not actually the union that you need basically for the path of preparation, because
Yeah.
that's the union of shamatha vipassana that you ride into the path of preparation from the path of accumulation.
Yeah.
Um, and the key term there is actually pliancy, the
Yeah.
pliancy of body and mind that occurs from the full achievement of shamatha, but that then is re-triggered, as it were, or
Reactivated. Yep.
brought,
Process.
it's elicited by the power of the vipassana itself.
Yeah.
Uh, and he overcomes all of these misconceptions that at his time, in his time, there was much more of a dichotomy between conceptual, analytical, debate ground kind of practice and the Mahamudra and Dzogchen traditions already flourishing in Tibet at that time, where there may have been some misconceptions floating around about just sit with nothing in your mind,
Yeah.
closer
Yeah.
to what's known as the
Ashan.
Hawashan Mahayan
Yeah. Yeah.
debate. And so Lama Tsongkhapa is making a very strong argument for the role of conceptuality in analysis that leads to the ultimate non-conceptuality of
Yeah. Yeah.
realizing
Yeah.
emptiness.
Yeah.
And for me, the analogy there that always stays in my mind is of the kindling that started the fire burns away in the fire.
Yep. Yeah. This is a good analogy, actually. So thank you for that introduction. There's lots of stuff there that came up. I think we could like just go for the whole podcast from here on in. You started off, and I'll start with some questions came up. So the first thing you said, you first approached Alan with some a question around the Gyu Samaja view and Dzogchen. I was wondering if you remember what that question was.
I actually do.
Yeah, what were you asking?
So I guess a little bit of explanation why was Guya Samaja on my mind. So my dissertation work, my doctoral dissertation, was audacious enough to try to look at the Madhyamaka philosophy at the root of Lama Tsongkhapa's explanations of the Guya Samaja Tantra.
Yeah.
And I had a marvelous opportunity to study in India for about 10.5 months, I think it ended up being, thanks to the American Institute of Indian Studies fellowship. And I stayed at a number of different places, both in Drumaling Monastery, Nunnery, and then I went to Sera Monastery. I actually also went to Debungen Ganden for His Holiness's Lamrim teachings that year in 2014. But then at Sera Monastery, I had the extraordinary opportunity to meet Geshe Kedrup Norsang, who was, I believe, still the primary scripture teacher for Gyute, the upper Tantric college of the Gelugpa school. A very long story I won't go into, but he took me as his student. He accepted that he would grant me teachings from Lama Tsongkhapa's Ngakrim Chenmo, or the great treatise on the steps of the path of mantra, the Vajrayana version of his great treatise. And then I followed Geshe Kedrup Norsang back up north to Gyute for the rest of that spring and into June, into just the beginning of June. And he allowed me again. There were there was a couple of nuns and a lay woman present, so I wasn't the only woman. He made sure that I wasn't the only woman in this class with many monks. But I had the opportunity to hear his direct teachings on the Kyerim and the Dzogrim of primarily Guya Samaja, and then also received teachings from Jado Rinpoche at the time on
nice.
Chakrasamvara.
Yeah.
And that was the time at which I feel so blessed to have received the Guya Samaja empowerment from His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. He came during
in Gyuto.
yeah.
What year was this?
2015.
2015.
So I had been immersed in Guya. This is a long story to say. I was immersed in Guya Samaja. Certainly from that time, and then through 2 years of writing my dissertation, and so then and then so that was 2015 when I went to this retreat with Lama Alan. 2016, and I had started to listen to Lama Alan's teachings, actually concurrently with that whole period. And this draw to Dzogchen, to study Dzogchen, even as I was immersed in the heights of the New Translation School, Tantras, as taught by Lama Tsongkhapa, and I didn't see it as a contradiction, and I didn't want to see it as a contradiction. Because I had a sense that somehow they were coming together, and there was something about Dzogchen that I needed to taste, to touch, to be exposed to, that would in turn shed light on what is this mind of clear light in the Guya Samaja. So my question to Lama Alan was, is pristine awareness the same or equivalent to the clear light of the fourth stage of the 5 stages of Guya Samaja?
So Rigpa and Dungya, so
exactly
the same or not? That was your question.
That was my question, to which Lama Alan, I think, unhesitatingly answered in the affirmative. But there.
So he said they're the same, right?
The referent is the same.
What do you mean the referent? The referent
as in that mind of clear light, the indwelling mind of clear light, primordial consciousness, the extremely subtle energy mind, any of these synonyms that are actually used across traditions.
So the subjective clear light, is that what you mean?
Well, the union of the subjective and objective clear light.
Okay, so the Dungya, so the clear light.
But
you qualified it by referent. I'm just trying to
Yeah,
understand that.
Because to put it in the context of the 5 stages within Gurya
Yeah.
Samaja is to presuppose a long series of developmental stages by which one has, well, of course, thoroughly mastered the shared teachings of the Lamrim, including significant experience in Śamatha Vipaśanā. But then typically within the Gelugpa tradition, one would have spent years in retreat mastering the Kyerim, the stage of generation,
Yeah.
to develop the enormous merit necessary to pass into the actual practice of the stage of completion. And Lama Tsongkhapa actually warns about starting the channel practices, the Tsalung, too soon, because he says you can get lots of intense experiences. Lama Tsongkhapa was saying this in the beginning of
Just hearing the teachings on impure illusory body grants you all the merit of the 3 times. Lama Tsongkhapa says that actually, so
Exactly, he does, I know.
it's always so tricky. But yeah, okay.
And,
So
yeah, I know exactly what you're referring to there. But he also, especially in the Ngakrim, basically is saying you'll get a smattering of the good qualities of the stage of completion
yeah,
if you go into it, if you're basically alternating or you go into it too quickly, but you will not be able to attain the full qualities of it taking you all the way to enlightenment within a matter of years.
yeah,
So the reason I'm specifying this is, for example, reaching the final end of the stage of generation within Gray Samaja, and this is
yeah,
in Yangchen Gawe Loja's
yeah.
and
It's
paths of
Tantric
that.
Grounds and Path.
You can remain in samadhi on the extremely subtle
Sort of job.
bindu, and the visualization within the subtle bindu for a day or a week or a month or as long as you want.
Yes. Yes. You don't have to do that, but you can. You can, some people who achieve the subtle generation stage, Kerem, certainly can do that. And it's what a practitioner to be able to do that. But what I'm interested, because it's a really cool question, right? You asked Lama Alan, right? Is clear light, actual clear light, 4th stage clear light, Guru Samaja, the real deal? Is it the same as Rigpa? Is basically your question, right? And
So
he
where
says yes, right? He says
exactly?
yes.
So where I'm going with this is it's the dissolution process. It's
Yes.
that in Gui Samaja, all of that stability, all of that merit from the meditation on the stage of generation prepares one to actually start drawing the energies into the central channel to enter, stay, and dissolve in the central
Yeah.
channel. And it's on the basis of that series of processes in the state of completion that they eventually dissolve into the indestructible bindu at the heart. And only then does the Dungya or the actual clear light manifest.
Yes.
So, and Kedrupje explains this actually in his notes on some of Lama Tsongkhapa's teachings, that in Goya Samaja, it's just a principle that when the coarse energies are manifest, the subtle and very subtle energies cannot be manifest. Or even when the subtle energies are manifest, the very subtle can't be manifest. It's like an on-off switch. And so one has to have dissolved those energies into the indestructible bindu in order for the very subtle mind to become manifest as that experience of this, the union of the subjective and objective clear light. And so then the enormous difference in the Dzogchen tradition, and this is where I wanted to get with this point, is it is asserted, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama has affirmed in the Dzogchen tradition, it's asserted that you don't need to dissolve the energies into the central channel in order for Rigpa or pristine awareness to become manifest. And that's huge in my mind. I mean, it's something I'm still
Sort of a big deal,
struggling.
isn't it?
Sorry.
It's sort of a big deal. Yeah, His
Yeah.
Holiness has been, I think His Holiness said this many times. It's so interesting, right? So basically what you're saying is that in the Gu Samaja practice, you're actually the dissolution is super important part of accessing actual clear light, right? You got to go through the anyway, got to go through the dissolution process. But this is within Dzogchen, you can have access to Rigpa and without necessarily going through this dissolution process. Is that what you're saying? Because
Yeah,
basically,
because in principle, Rigpa can become manifest while the senses are still open.
Why the what is still open?
While the senses are still open, or they're
Oh,
still
yes.
clear.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
this is a delicate point, which I think can be easily misunderstood, because if one's not gone through all the stages, even within the Dzogchen tradition of going deeper, deeper, deeper into being able to make manifest, and I'm thinking of the Vajra essence right now. That's the stages I have in mind. So that one makes manifest conscious awareness, or the path pristine awareness, and then realizes through that realizes emptiness, realizes the emptiness of all phenomena, the great middle way, the emptiness of all phenomena, that then reveals the ground Dharmakaya. There's like a process through taking the mind as the path. And we have the section from Dijum Lingpa here in Śamatha and Vipaśanā on taking the mind as the path, where one does have to, I want to say, as an ordinary person, or a person of lowest faculties, because of course there are the exceptions, and I'll say something about that in a moment, but most of us, going through the stages of settling the mind in its natural state. And if one goes all the way through that process, there will be a point at which the senses naturally implode into the substrate consciousness.
Yeah.
But penetrating through the substrate consciousness into pristine awareness, it's like a waking up again. And that's the kind of language they use. It's like waking up, the senses become unimpeded because the creative power of pristine awareness is unimpeded.
Yeah.
And so it's a different view, actually. This is delicate to say. Because even in Gurya Samaja, the aggregates, the sense species, the sense faculties, are viewed as pure. That's part of the path to even dissolve them. It's not as if you're dissolving impure aggregates into the clear light. They already had to be viewed as pure in order to be dissolved. But it's as if the path of Trekchö, of cutting through to pristine awareness, reveals that primordial purity, not only of the sense bases and the aggregates of the practitioner's body, but of all phenomena.
Yeah.
And I think it's extremely parallel, existentially, ontologically, what's taking place when the ground of the mind, the ground of reality, is made manifest.
Yeah.
Then all things appear as pure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, this
I don't want to
idea.
say sorry, I don't want to say anything too definitively about what is that actual difference in the dissolution of the elements or not.
Well, and so in some ways, maybe we don't even have to go there to like have this conversation about whether you can have access to Rigpa without the dissolution, because obviously there's the tradition of pointing out, right? And so obviously, if we take this on face value, that you can have the Rigpa pointed out, introduced to Rigpa with your senses open, right? So then it seems like yeah, we can get on that. If you get on that, if you agree with that, you're on that bus. Even in Mahamudra traditions, the lamas are very clear that even in the first two stages of settling the mind, a lama can quite introduce the nature of mind, right? Ninth Karmapa says that. Many of the lamas say that. So it's actually, so this seems like a special case for these traditions, actually, like what you brought up is that, clear light, Rigpa, you can have access to Rigpa. Like His Holiness says that. But then, okay, great. So what do we do?
So this is a point that's deep in the Dzogchen tradition, which is, and again, my main knowledge of the Dzogchen tradition at this point is through the revelations of Dudjom Lingpa. I've spent far more time with Dudjom Lingpa's revelations than with any other authoritative Dzogchen sources. But it has to do with this idea of Datawe Shepa, the consciousness of this present moment, or this present moment consciousness.
Yeah.
because it is not other than Rikpa.
Mm.
But the explanation of samsara in the Lakeborn Vajra Padmasambhava's revelations to Dujam Lingpa, the origin of samsara is when that ordinary consciousness goes, and the word is lungtendu songwa, it goes ethically unspecified. It turns ethically unspecified. And that's because it is not recognized, because it is not known. And so the accretions of a whole world of appearances that are grasped as real comes, yes, in a progressive way, but it happens virtually instantaneously in any moment that we're not recognizing that pristine awareness. And
Yeah.
so it becomes a very delicate translation issue, even of times that the word Rigpa is used, and it seems like it might just be awareness.
Mm.
Well, of course, the word can also just mean to know in Tibetan.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then by context, when is it clearly pointing to that transcendent dimension of pristine awareness that is not modified,
Yeah.
unstructured, unmodified, uncontaminated by thoughts of the three times, grasping to dualistic, subject and object. Uh, so it is the present moment consciousness completely free of grasping to true existence, to anything as being truly existent. And that, in one sense, you could say that's why, through the power of the inspiring realization of a Lama, someone could be tipped, as it were, to have that experience through pointing out instructions. But of course, that glimpse is not yet what it is to be a Vidyadhara, as in
Mm.
someone who holds
Yeah.
or grasps, in different meaning of grasp, but hold as in
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
are the bearer of knowledge, Vidya being the Sanskrit word for Rikpa,
Yeah.
of that
Yeah.
knowledge. So yeah, it's delicate.
Very delicate. What a question you asked to start this journey, right? So that was a nice exploration. And the other thing you started talking about was how, translation and sitting with these words and is like a guru yoga. And also, as you were saying, it's sort of like seems like an analytical meditation, almost like a qigong, right? You're like sitting and rolling these ideas through your mind and trying to get insight into what's being said so you can translate it accurately. And I think that was the way you described it was beautiful, actually, and
Mm.
and really gives you a taste of how translation itself can be a profound practice. And
Mm.
so I was wondering, as you were, translating these volumes, was there any particular passages that really you sat with for a while and you went back and forth and then you came with this sort of insight, and if you could sort of share that for
Innumerable
yeah.
passages, but the one that comes to mind, and because just back to the story of the evolution of the book, it was the last text that was translated for this book once it was already well into the copy editing process, and that's the Garland of Supreme Medicinal Nectar,
Mm.
uh, which you had mentioned beforehand.
Yeah.
It's of interest to you as well. Um, and that was a text also that I knew of back to graduate school, um, and had translated just a tiny little section of for my dissertation. Um, but knew when I read it, actually, I first read it in a state of retreat. It was a short retreat. But when I encountered that text, I want to use that Tibetan word of jelwa. I
Yeah, yeah.
met the text.
Met.
Um, there was a sense of actually everything I need for my whole life is here.
That particular text,
That
wow.
particular text,
It's yeah, it's very profound,
I
actually.
didn't even understand it yet. I knew there were so
Mm.
many words I would need to look up, and I was in a state of retreat, and I didn't want to be using a dictionary of,
Mm.
for all the details. But it was because it had the blessing. And so here's the key point about the text. For me personally, because of my devotion to Lama Tsongkhapa,
Yes.
it had the blessing of Lama Tsongkhapa, and it was pure Dzogchen.
Yeah, it's perfect for you, right?
Right.
Can we tell the story? Can we tell a little bit of the story of this? I'll start it and then you
Okay,
can
sure.
finish it because I love the start of this story. So you you have this great mystic, right? He's Drupchen, you know, he's a great meditator, right? Lodrak Drupchen, and he's this mystic, and he has, you know, these various visions, and he one day he has a dream, and a dakini comes to him, and the dakini says to him, "You have, you know, this past karmic connection with Tsongkhapa. You should reach out to him, and you should give him teachings, and you should take teachings from him," right? So of course this mystic, what does he do? Of course he's going to follow the dakini's instructions, right? So then he reaches out to Tsongkhapa, right? And and maybe you can take it from here, like, because I love that part of the story, right? It often gets missed.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and we didn't. I didn't include that part in the introduction here, but that's beautifully told by Tim Jimbla in
Yeah, in Jimbala, yeah, that's I've spoken about with Jimbala about this text a lot. Yeah,
oh, yeah.
and then so they have, you know, they connect, right? And
Yeah, and the part of the other lore that is this has really gone down in Gelugpa tradition that when they, because it's the epitome of pure vision,
mm,
um, when they encountered each other, Tsongkhapa had a vision of Vajrapani. He didn't see the human being Lodrok Drupchen. He saw Vajrapani.
yeah,
And Lodrok Drupchen, when he saw Tsongkhapa, I always imagine it as being some distance, like they're walking to each
yeah,
other
yeah,
on a
yeah,
pathway,
yeah,
and he sees Manjushri
yeah,
blazing in glory.
yeah,
And those were the respective yidam that each of them had had visions of already themselves. So they had the special capacity to have visions of each of those yidam. And what was a discovery to me through Thupten Jimbala's research was that Lodrok Drupchen wasn't even a Nyingmapa. His father
no,
was, and he had had some maybe Nyingma empowerments as a child, but he was a Kadampa.
Kadampa master,
Carried the Lamrim lineage, or the Kadampa lineage from Jo Atisha, and that's actually the transmissions primarily that Tsongkhapa received from him, were the
yes,
transmissions of Atisha's teachings. And I'm forgetting right now what it was that Tsongkhapa taught to him, but it was a significant transmission that they received. But then they ended up spending 7 months together.
yeah,
And this was after Tsongkhapa's first 3 years of retreat, and he had his group, I suppose it was the Special Eight that he had with him. But then it was, and Tsongkhapa at that time, even after his 3 years in retreat, um, still had questions about emptiness. He already had visions of Manjushri, and he still wasn't sure. He had
it's so amazing, right, to
these
hear these
fine
stories.
points.
I still have some subtle doubts.
Yeah. Um, so
And he's going to go to India, right? He's saying, "I want to go to India. I've got to solve these doubts. I got to meet Mitra Yogan.
mhm.
I'm gonna go there." And then Drupchen's like, "Why would you go to India? It's going to cause all these troubles. And you know, I have a direct line to Vajrapani. Why don't I ask him your questions?"
Uh, so, but the interesting thing is that the revelation didn't occur, as far as we can tell, while they were actually together,
No, it came
because it
later.
comes as this letter, sent some months later, um, so that Lodrok Drupchen wrote as a letter and sent to Tsongkhapa, and Tsongkhapa's response to that was just unbridled praise for this revelation. Uh, and here's a catch that was extremely important to me in studying it and then eventually translating it. And this was something David Germano pointed out to me back in graduate school, which
Wow.
is parts of it are verbatim identical to a revelation in Longchenpa's Ninti Yapshi, the
Yeah.
Kanjani Yapshi.
Kanjanintik, yeah. Yeah. That's
Uh,
what's cool.
and it was very meaningful to me when I finally was translating it to have the two texts on
Oh,
the
so
same.
you did it. You did it. You did
Oh,
that? You had a
I
look at
did.
both?
I
Very
did
cool.
on the same screen, line by line.
That's cool.
Um, and of course, we weren't translating the one that's in Longchenpa's collected works, Terma. But there are a few footnotes where I actually had to choose the reading that was there. And the reason I chose the reading from that, actually, I mean, the only way I can justify that as a scholar is that there's unmistakable connection between these two texts.
Yeah.
Um,
So you read some of the text based on the Khandro Nyingtik deviations or
So I
no?
should be more specific about this. There are places where the Kanjur Nyingtik is definitely a different text.
Okay.
Sections that
Yeah.
are not included in Lodrok Drupchen's letter, his text to
Yeah.
Tsongkhapa, and there are large sections, especially the prophecies about Tsongkhapa's future lifetimes, his past, the
Yeah.
revelation of his past lifetimes. That's all completely unique to
Yeah.
the Vajrapani revelation
Mm.
through the hand, as it were, of Lodrok Drupchen. But when the line itself was verbatim identical, in other words, the Tibetan was the same in both, but there was one letter
Okay.
different
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
one word different. Because, and this is just a hint about textuality, and I really cared to get, if there's no such thing as the right meaning, there's no such thing as the right text, because
Mm.
these are all from woodblock prints made later.
Yeah.
But because I've consulted several different versions from Lodrok Drupchen's collected works,
Yeah.
which would have been far less controversial than Tsongkhapa's collected works. So this text within Tsongkhapa's collected works has a colophon attached to it, which is in every version I could consult of Tsongkhapa's collected works, but the woodblock prints go only back to like 16th, 17th century. We don't know how early this colophon was added, but it is clearly expressing doubts on the part of some Gelugpa scholar. Could this really have been what Tsongkhapa was praising as being without error, omission, or addition? Um, and it's it's understandable. It's basically just saying whatever this is, you need to have the view of Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti, which is wonderful. Uh,
That's what the colophon says, right?
the colophon we did not translate deliberately.
Oh, okay.
Professor Thurman, when he translated this text in Life and Teachings of Tsongkhapa, he also decided not to translate the colophon.
Yeah.
It's so obviously added by someone else later, and
Yeah.
there's political undercurrent to it.
But the colophon's not in Tsongkhapa. In whose voice is the colophon in?
The
In a
colophon,
later.
the
Yeah.
colophon is in the voice of a redactor of Tsongkhapa's collected works.
Okay. So then, okay.
Yeah.
So that
It's
doesn't
simply,
really.
we don't know what century, we don't know exactly when it was added. It could have been as early as the 15th century, but I don't want to dwell there actually, because what was heartening to me was to immerse myself in several different old manuscripts of Lodrok Drupchen's
Yeah.
collected works, which wouldn't have had that controversy around it. He had lots of revelations from Vajrapani that he wrote down in his collected works.
Yeah.
And again, for the most part, that was even more verbatim all the way through the prophecies from beginning to end. It is the same text as we have in Tsongkhapa's collected works.
Yeah.
But where there were slight differences in reading, and the one in Lodrokpa's collected works made more sense,
Yeah.
I took the liberty to choose that reading, footnoted it, because it's possible that Gelugpa's, I won't even say scholars, but just the scribes copying out the collected works would not have been familiar with the Dzogchen terminology. And so
Terminology.
it's
Yeah.
easier for mistakes to come in,
Yeah.
scribal level even.
Yeah.
Um, but then it's only a couple of times when I chose something from the Longchenpa's collected works.
Yeah.
Um, and that was simply because it rang true as the actual meaning of the phrase, and the other two didn't ring true as the actual meaning of the phrase. And so then it's, frankly, we know that Lok Drakpa, he says it himself, he heard all of this
Yeah.
as
You didn't
a
say.
smooth running voice. He wrote
Yeah.
it down quickly and admits to Tsongkhapa, I didn't get it all down.
Yeah.
And so when there are these homonyms in Tibetan, um, it's
Yeah.
there is no perfect text.
Yeah. What a fascinating text. And so tell us a little bit about the text then, right? So we heard about how it came about. What let me ask you this. What makes it Dzogchen, do you think?
Oh, it's unmistakable for anyone who has studied in Dzogchen. It starts with the question that, of course, in the other terma, Yeshe Tsogyal posed to Guru Rinpoche,
Yeah.
and here it's mm, the character, I want to say, of Hlodrakpa by the name of Karmavajra, posing to Vajrapani on behalf of Matibhadrashi or Matibhadra, who is Tsongkhapa, or Lobsang, literally, that's the Sanskrit for Lobsang.
Yeah.
The question is about the clear light, which could, when you back to Dvoya Samaja,
Yeah, this is perfect.
It's Tsongkhapa who wants to know about the clear light. What's the real meaning of the clear light? Because his two lingering questions were the subtle interpretation of the Prasangika according to Chandakirti,
Yeah.
even though I'm bringing Prasangika as a much later term, but what did Chandakirti really mean? And some subtle points in the illusory body and the clear light in Goya Samaja. So of course, that's Tsongkhapa's question. He wants to know the fine points of the clear light. But the answer comes back as Ngo Rangshin Tukche,
Yeah.
the three
Essence, nature.
attributes or ways of understanding pristine awareness within the Dzogchen tradition.
Yeah.
For English speakers, the essential nature, the manifest nature, and all-pervasive compassion. And actually, to your earlier question about things that I've sat with,
Yeah.
that series of answers about the pitfalls of how one might mistake each of the three are like a koan for me. It just, every single time I've read it, whether in Tibetan or in English, going over the English, revising the English again, it just goes deeper and deeper and deeper, because these are pitfalls we can all fall into. And if they're pitfalls for a yogi of the stature of Tsongkhapa, how much more for any of us approaching, thinking we understand emptiness, thinking we understand pristine awareness, thinking we understand compassion, thinking we understand the non-duality of appearances and luminosity. And it cuts straight through. It cuts straight through.
So just so the audience, sort of gets this point, like, the question is asked in a way that Tsongkhapa would have been very comfortable with, right? Or a Sakya monk, or a Kadampa monk, and what is clear light, what is Urso, and the answer comes back in a very Dzogchen Nyingma rubric. This Ngo Rangshin Tuje, this and so this is perfect, right? This is like, it's describing clear light as you would describe Rigpa, right? So when your question was to Lama Alan, is clear light the same as Rigpa? This text is like confronting that question directly on, head on, right? It's very cool. And tell us a little bit about this answer and sort of Ngo Rangshin Tuje, this sort of why is that Dzogchen? Why? Obviously it's a different language, but why? What about this rubric that makes it Dzogchen?
There's a correlation between those three to the much more classical and ubiquitous triad of the Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly in Mahayana, Sutrayana Buddhism, Sambhogakaya and Nirmanakaya are, by definition, they are they are kayas or embodiments of form. They are Rupakaya. And so Nirmanakaya means either sentient beings in the form of a sentient being, a kyewa truku, or a sentient being in Nirmanakaya, who can appear as a teacher, who can appear as a friend, a Dharma guide, an ordinary being who helps you along the path. Nirmanakayas can appear as physical objects and so on. So there's an enormous range of Nirmanakayas, even from I want to say, a more classical Mahayana perspective, and then, of course, in the Vajrayana as well. Likewise, Sambhogakaya is understood as this very, very subtle body of form with face and arms that can only be seen by Arya Bodhisattvas and higher. But in Dzogchen, that trinity, through the correlation with the essential nature, manifest nature, and compassion, is explained or pointed out in such a way that it is absolutely ubiquitous, absolutely universal,
Yeah.
not individualized into this is Nirmanakaya, this isn't.
Yeah.
Because the Sambhogakaya then is described as the very luminosity of pristine awareness.
Yeah.
The essential nature is the very emptiness of pristine awareness.
Yeah.
And the all-pervasive compassion. And this is where I almost have to open to it because I don't want to say one word off.
Yeah. This is where Tsongkhapa might be stretched here, right? Because if you look at those three, Ngowa, Tongpa, so the Tsongkhapa is very comfortable with the description of clear light as emptiness, right? And then if you'd say like Rangshin Selwa, so you could say that the nature is clarity, and even from Guya Samaja, he could come along with that, the subjective aspects, clear light. Yeah.
The union of illusory body and
Well, you can do, yeah, the union. So he would go along with his Guya Samaja on this. And we have to understand at this point, Tsongkhapa hadn't had his vision of Buddha Palita, hadn't written dependent Tendril Topa.
right.
I actually think he does have that before he gets the answer. I asked Jimpa this, and I'm not certain, but I believe he'd realized emptiness before he got the answer from. But that needs more research, I think. But in any case, but the tipping point here is Tujia. What is compassion, right? And that's what you're going to read to us, right?
Yeah, I have to because it's so subtle. Karma Vajra. So this is Vajrapani speaking to Flodrakpa by the name of Karma Vajra, which really means it's like a Vajra assistant in a ritual.
Okay.
He's the Leiki Dorje would be the
Yep.
ritual assistant. Karma Vajra, with respect to compassion also, there are 4 pitfalls. There have been 4 pitfalls for each of the 3. The way one goes wrong is this. These thoughts that either do not arise or arise in all manner of ways. And again, the English feels clunky here. It's a Tibetan phrase that could just mean like they arise or they don't arise. It's just anything. It's like that kind of anything at all of these namtok, these thoughts. These thoughts that either do not arise or arise in all manner of ways are the natural glow of pristine awareness, emptiness and luminosity. So that statement already is pure Dzogchen to say.
What's the word for glow? Is it cell? What are you using?
No, this will be a rangdang, but
Rangdang. Oh,
with a
yeah, yeah.
mao prefix instead of a gao. So
Yeah.
it's the mdang, it's the inner glow. When there's the distinction between the outer radiance and the inner glow, when we translate it as glow, it's
Glow. Okay, no, I got that. That's a nice translation. And this is very Dzogchen. This language, right? And that there's this sort of radiance that comes from the center out rather than like a reflection. Yeah.
and that the thoughts themselves, the randomness, that's the word I want to get to, the randomness of
Randomness.
thoughts is a glow. He doesn't use the word here of the creative expression or tzel, but that itself is the energy of pristine awareness arising.
Why do you say randomness?
As in any thought at all
Is
could.
this like Gak Are you trying to, or
No,
different?
no, what I mean is in Guya Samaja, for example, one develops pure vision in the stage of generation by completely cutting off one's interactions with ordinary appearances and generating the mandala so that one is immersed in single-pointed samadhi on that mandala as many hours a day as possible.
Yeah.
And Tsongkhapa explains how just cutting off certain appearances wouldn't stop them. But he even cites Dharmakirti is in the Ngakam Tremo. He cites Dharmakirti for, well, if you stop the flow of one kind of causal stream within the mind, it won't continue. So you're cutting off ordinary appearances and deliberately replacing them with pure appearances.
Yeah.
And that's training the mind until those pure appearances arise naturally once the energies have entered the central channel in the stage of completion. That's what I was hinting at before. So
Yeah.
yes, they arise naturally, but they arise naturally. Pure appearances then arise naturally because of a very special configuration of energy mind within the yogi's body. Whereas in Dzogchen, one comes to spontaneously see all thoughts and all appearances as pure because one has seen their ground.
Yeah.
And one didn't, it's that difference between a developmental model and a discovery model. It's an
Yeah.
uncovering of the natural purity of reality and of the thoughts that appear even in our own minds because one has glimpsed or stabilized a realization of their ground. So that's deep.
Yeah.
That's really deep. And I'm thinking of Yangtang Rinpoche in his Pith instructions that are also in this volume. He says that explicitly for someone who has, now I'm paraphrasing, but for one who has realized this great perfection, and he's just described the equality of samsara and nirvana, impartial pure vision and impartial compassion arise spontaneously, emerge spontaneously and effortlessly because you've tapped into the wellspring, and therefore things do arise differently. But now I'll come back then to this paragraph. So he's saying this is prefaced by the way one goes wrong with respect to compassion.
Yeah.
Is this? And actually in Tibetan, this is all one sentence, what follows, but we had to break it up into two sentences. So establishing the referent, these thoughts that either do not arise or arise in all manner of ways are the natural glow of pristine awareness, emptiness, and luminosity. So he places really in apposition pristine awareness, emptiness, and luminosity, all as different ways of referring to the same thing. When someone does not understand how it is that however many such thoughts appear, they cannot fall beyond the scope of pristine awareness and emptiness. This is said to be mistaking pristine awareness for emptiness. And in each of these cases, this word gulwa,
Yeah.
it's mistaking one thing for another. And I've reflected for so long on which should the sequence be in English to make it clear. But what it's saying, the meaning is what's actually in front of you, as it were, is pristine awareness. What is actually being perceived is pristine awareness, but you're not perceiving it as such. You're missing it and thinking it's just emptiness.
Yeah.
And so and now we could tie this to a Gelugpa tradition, even though this is the same question and answer that Yeshe Tsogyal had with Guru. This doesn't differ. If one thinks in a classical Sutrayana context, obscurative reality, ultimate reality. Ultimate reality is emptiness. That's the only thing that's ultimate. The only final view is emptiness.
Yeah.
From a Dzogchen perspective, that will too quickly become an emptiness that is cut off.
Yeah.
A nihilistic emptiness. Now, there are ways around that in Goya Samaja because of the union of appearances and emptiness as that's realized. And that has to do with the purification of the subtle energies. But here it's saying you have to get that indivisible union between pristine awareness and emptiness, the emptiness and luminosity, completely primordially indivisible, and not ever get stuck in thinking there's just an inert emptiness.
Yeah. So this is the point, is that emptiness is not impotent. And, we have all these words to describe emptiness as unarisen, but in this circumstance, unarisen sits right there with unceasing. Like these two words come together. The Dharma Chat can be described as unarisen, but still, it also has the potentiality that is unceasing as well. Like this is what is given extra. It seems like from Vajrapani in this when he talks about compassion. It's very profound, and also it can be tricky for the philosopher, right? So if you start being a philosopher again, you start saying, "Oh, conventional reality, ultimate reality. Where do I, what if we just talk about ultimate truth?" Tuje goes on the side of ultimate truth or on the side of conventional truth, right? This gets very tricky for the philosophers, right? There might be disagreements on this level, but there seems to be never any disagreements from the yogis.
Yeah. His Holiness the Dalai Lama actually addressed this point in what to me is now famous, the talk that he gave, I believe it was 1979. It's translated kindness in the book called Kindness, Clarity, and Insight.
Yeah.
Um, beautifully translated by Jeffrey Hopkins. There's actually a passage that I end up trying to translate. This is separately in my dissertation from the Tibetan, because His Holiness went straight to that point, and I don't have it memorized now, so I can't say it properly. But he was acknowledging that from the perspective of pristine awareness being awareness, which from an analytical, philosophical point of view means it has to change moment to moment.
Yeah.
Then you'd have to posit it as an obscurative reality.
Yeah.
But from the perspective of it being the ground of all that exists, then it can be posited as ultimate reality.
Yeah.
And His Holiness, I remember, used that same phrase, rangdang,
Yeah.
that then all appearances are the natural glow or the natural radiance, depending on which word he had in mind, because they are virtual homonyms, the natural radiance of all appearances. And of course, for me, with my Christian background, this goes so deep into a whole new vision of what do we mean by creation? What do we mean by a divine ground from which creation is pure at its root, but through being misunderstood, through being mangled, as it were, by centuries minds?
Yeah. So
Goes a very bit further.
this connects on that level for you. That's very cool. So this idea of creation becomes an important key word for you, right?
Yeah, because, well, this would go into a whole other topic, but I'll just say it this way. There was a certain point in my study of Buddhism and accepting the idea of samsara because it was so obvious in front of me. I mean, this is a world of suffering, all too obvious. And so the phrase came, this is decades ago, the world God created is not the one we're seeing, or the world God creates is not the one we're experiencing right now, insofar as we're suffering, insofar as we are caught in a cycle of samsara. And so for me, that was a deep reconciliation that I've carried for a very long time. But in this context here, this phrase that however many such thoughts appear, they cannot fall beyond the scope of pristine awareness and emptiness. And if someone doesn't understand that, they've missed pristine awareness and are just positing emptiness.
Yeah. Yeah. This is profound, and there's so many metaphors in this area, like a bird cannot fly free of the sky, for example, right? Thoughts are, the energy of the Dharmakaya, these sort of things, right? It's very beautiful. I feel like we're coming to the end of our conversation, but I think it's been a nice circle here. We sort of started with a profound question, and we had some masters tell us some profound answers by the end of it. I'm not sure I fully understand, but I'll keep trying.
Me either.
There's one loose thread you brought up, and we didn't really take it anywhere, but maybe I'll give you a chance to just tie a bow on it.
Yeah.
You explained very clearly and very nicely about how Tsongkhapa has this idea that actually the union of shamatha, when we talk shamatha and vipassana, when we're talking about this, it's actually the after you've achieved shamatha and then you practice analytical meditation, it's the analysis that inspires the pliancy, the bliss and joy that's brought about by pliancy of the body and mind, and that this using analysis to bring about this special state, right? This union of shamatha and vipassana. How do you square that with the Dzogchen Ma Mudra traditions? Is that just a different way of practicing, or do you see that as also in some ways what we're doing in the other system? I was just wondering if you see them as two horses or what?
I think this is part of the beauty of this book itself, the way that the array of texts are actually laid out. And once readers study both the historical thread, the thread across schools, the
Yeah.
thread across topics, the way one can see parallels of how different authors at different times and in different nominal schools of Tibetan Buddhism, and of course going back to Atisha in India, address very similar themes,
Mm,
I think is helpful. I hope is helpful
mm,
because it can cut through some misconceptions too. For example, we have Dudjom Lingpa in his commentary recorded by Pema Dashi to this marvelous section of the Sharp Vajra of Conscious Awareness Tantra, emphasizing that up until a certain point, you need to alternate between shamatha and vipassana, and he says analytical vipassana. Likewise, Kamachame is presenting the shamatha as it's shared across both the Mahayana, Mahamudra, and Dzogchen, and then he presents vipassana in its shared form as the analytical cultivation of vipassana, to be followed by a section not translated here where he goes straight into the Dzogchen tradition.
mm.
So analysis is not absent. That's what I'm really trying to say. Analysis is
Yeah.
not absent in the Mahamudra or the Dzogchen traditions. And Karmachame, being the enormously erudite scholar and practitioner that he was able to draw together these quotations from sutras, tantras, Dzogchen tantras, all into one place. And you see like these revolving themes.
Mm, yeah.
And then he, in his own personal instruction, this is Kamachame, he's like synonymous with the union of Mahamudra and Dzogchen.
Mm,
Um, he gives his personal instructions to his disciples, and it's a series of questions, but one won't get an answer to those questions unless one analyzes. It's not
mm.
simply a rhetorical question that will lead immediately to a prasangika kind of emptiness, blah, blah, blank out. No, it's where are tomorrow's thoughts staying today?
Yeah.
Look, and he keeps saying, look, investigate, analyze. So I see a deep similarity there, actually, that once one has sufficient stillness to be able to pose those questions to a mind that is not being trembled by the five obscurations, or at least coarse forms of those five obscurations, one can gain a glimpse of a true non-conceptuality, which is not the non-conceptuality that comes simply from calming thoughts through shamatha, but that comes through penetrating the very grasping to things as having signs, as having characteristics. That's the non-conceptuality that Vipassana reveals. It's like tear off the labels, tear off the very identification of something as something. And likewise, both the Mahamudra and Dzogchen traditions include an analysis of outer objects and the inner mind. But there's definitely a greater emphasis on investigating the inner mind, as Kamachame says, so that you cut conceptual elaboration from its root.
Mm,
But Tsongkhapa is not actually specifying whether you're analyzing outer objects or the mind itself in that context. He's just saying you're analyzing emptiness to see what isn't there. But one
mm,
could just as well apply his instructions on the subtle union of shamatha vipassana if the the object, as it were, the phenomena that's being analyzed, ultimately is the stream of consciousness, the stream of
mm.
one's own mind. Uh, so does that answer
Yeah,
your
that was nice. That was nice. Thank you so much. So let's have a break. I'm going to come back and then do the Q&A from the audience. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Really enjoyed that. I'll
Thank
see
you.
you in 5 minutes. Okay, everyone, thank you for your questions. There's some great ones here, and we'll just wait for Eva to come back and we'll get into it. I hope you enjoyed the discussion so far. The book is up and available for sale. It's incredible. Lama Alan and Eva have done a great job with these translations, and it's such a treasure house of text. Here we go. You ready?
Hope so.
We got some great questions, and thank you for the conversation so far. That was brilliant. Um, People don't know we had nothing planned, so it's really so that was great where it took us. So there's a couple of themes actually. I'm gonna pull some together. So two themes, a few more themes. The first two themes are retreat practice. So I'll and the connection with Christianity. So let's start with retreat practice, and basically the questions all circle around. They want some advice from you for preparing for a long retreat, what sort of practice, what sort of support, what text might be helpful to read that will prepare you for challenges, even what diet, these sort of practical things leading up to and preparing for a long-term retreat. Any advice you could lend?
Oh, first of all, it brings such joy to my heart to know that I can't see your faces, all of you listening now, that there are people um, in our world today who care enough about these practices, who care about enough about reaching deep states of silence and solitude, stillness, in order to understand reality better. Um, so that's my joy and gratitude to all of you. When I started my long-term retreat in 2017, I'd done annual retreats, actually going back to 2004 or so, some kind of annual retreat each year, just finding a place and going off by myself, and some were much more structured, some less structured. But one of my prayers in the course of even my first year of long-term solitary retreat was, may I be able to help others through this process. Because I just saw how difficult it can be. And I just never want to mince words about long-term retreat is not easy. I think sometimes, depending on a person or how much preparation they have, a 1 month retreat can be a sweet spot. Like, oh, so beautiful to just get to that level of silence, that level of calm. You can experience things in your meditation you never could have experienced in a daily practice, even for years of an hour a day or 2 hours a day. Just having a full boundaried retreat for a month can be a blessing from heaven for people. And so that's a wonderful sweet spot. And that, in terms of preparing for longer term retreat, I definitely recommend. I mean, if you've never done retreat before, start with a weekend, start with a week. I think oftentimes people who've done many group retreats, because there are so many wonderful group retreats that are guided, you have a whole community, you have that power of people sitting together, doing certain practices on a strict schedule, that can be enormously transformative, usually for a short time. I mean, there's some places such as Plum Village, I just so admire the long-term continuity of that practice. Likewise, it's more in the Zen tradition, where it's part of the life to progress in a community environment. And of course, we know from the history of the Zen tradition, for example, people probably were reaching some very deep states of samadhi based on that practice. And of course, in certain Theravada traditions where there is meditation emphasized, but still in a group format, it doesn't stop people from going very deep. So I want to make that clear, even though, for example, at the Center for Contemplative Research, we do emphasize, and it's set up for solitary retreat, different people are more predisposed to different environments that might be more or less nourishing. But to progress further into these refined practices of shamatha, vipassana, it can be extremely helpful to be in solitude. Because I almost want to say, because of the very things that make it hard, are what enable one to make the progress. What makes it hard is that one is facing one's personal samsara head on with no blinders and no anesthesia. And that's why it can, as I say, sometimes it can be difficult right away. Sometimes it can be really lovely. Oh, I'm in solitude, I'm in silence, nobody's bothering me, until the mind starts to set in. And then all you're looking at is this mind and the hopes and the fears and the missed dreams and the disappointments and the hurts and the traumas and everything one has, the accretions of this life in particular. Now, of course, when one goes very deep, then one's looking at the accretions of past lives as well. But when I say what makes it hard is what makes it beneficial is that in order to penetrate to a deeper dimension of consciousness, one has to have released attachment to all those things that the mind throws up. Because as long as the mind is throwing it up and is successful in catching us, as it were, personifying as though there's the mind. It's a dance to try to describe this. Things are arising from the mind. And as long as we're in the grip of those things, and they can be really, to say, it's the stuff of our lives. I'm not belittling it. It's the stuff of our lives that we're facing. But as long as we are in that story, the mind will not be able to settle to a deeper dimension of consciousness. It might for a very short time, but it won't be really sustainable. Like it'll be more like a performance. Retreat early on for me often felt like a performance, like a dance performance, and I would get really ready and then jump in and do it well, and then see how the body would have to relax afterward. And it took me a long time actually to realize why that wasn't sustainable. So in terms of preparation for what I'm describing as a sometimes very difficult road of facing one's mind and body head on, it's the four revolutions in Outlook, which is Lama Alan and my translation for what's often known as the four thoughts that turn the mind, but it's turning the mind to Dharma. And the whole point is that it's 180-degree turn. And I was thinking about this a little bit before our talk, actually. Retreat can be a lot like dying. Because if one has committed to stay in retreat, especially for a long time, or especially for as long as it takes, in the quote unquote, and the long as it takes, I've got to say, this is my personal advice. Is it just me talking right now? If you think of as long as it takes, don't make shamatha the end of that sentence. Because a fixation on shamatha alone as a goal of retreat will get unbalanced at a certain point. The as long as it takes ideally should be enlightenment. And we have in this book the kind of texts that show us how that can be made manifest within a human lifetime, a precious human lifetime. And so with the guidance of a qualified teacher, through one's own experience, one will gain more and more clarity on the sequence of practices that is the best for you. And every person's a little bit different. And I've learned a lot about this from trying to guide, seeking to guide fellow retreatants. Because people bring a lot of diverse background of how much formal Dharma training they've had, how much training in other traditions, how much on the cushion meditation, how much reading, sometimes enormous insights that came spontaneously, but then they want to catch up, as it were, through a more sustained practice. So the individual guidance will be different from person to person. But overall, what I'm saying about these four revolutions, just in briefest terms, I won't explain them all, but mindfulness of impermanence. Well, first, the preciousness of this human life, but then the impermanence that is not going to last for long. And then the all pervasive sufferings of samsara, that there's nowhere in samsara that we can escape from the suffering, especially of conditioned existence, and then the infallibility or the unfailing nature of karmic cause and effect. But taken together, those four revolutions, those contemplations, they're not supposed to be a browbeating sort of, hitting oneself with, I really should be practicing, I really should be practicing, I really should be practicing. That's not a successful use of the four revolutions in outlook. When you actually glimpse the scope of samsara, that's the basis for bodhicitta. It's tragically easy to develop compassion in our contemporary world. I say tragically easy because there's so much to have compassion for. And even if that were compassion that's not simply empathy or simply feeling sorry for, but that's compassion that has a goal, that has a dream, that has things could be different. I want to do something to make them different. There are so many ways in our world that one can go out and do things to make things different and meaningful things. So even that kind of immeasurable compassion won't be enough to take one through the doorway, the portals to a sustainable realization of the union of Śamatha, Vipaśanā, and pristine awareness. Because when the going gets really tough, it will be preferable for that individual if they haven't penetrated, or rather gotten the glimpse of the fullness of samsara and the meaning of personal impermanence and the fact that whatever we do in this life will project who we are in the future. If one hasn't fathomed that, then doing something in this world will be more worthwhile, and it should be more worthwhile. I almost want to say, if one's mind is not at that place where one's goals are fashioned by a glimpse of all three realms that transcend 2 trillion galaxies of the known world to science, then retreat's too hard. One shouldn't be doing that for more than a couple months. I mean, a few months might be wonderful. But then take that calm, take that balance, take those discoveries back into the world and serve sentient beings in any way that one has the skills to do. But if one has the intuition, the yearning to stay in retreat as long as it takes, which, as Yangtang Rinpoche says in this book, without counting the months or years spent in retreat, practice until your realization becomes the expanse. And that's a very specific term for your realization. Your experience becomes the expanse when it becomes realization that's not going to go away, that's not going to shift. And that takes a kind of perseverance that takes years to develop. And I also don't want to scare anyone away as if, oh, you have to have that kind of motivation before you even start, because it's often retreat itself that develops that depth of motivation. I know that much of my first year in retreat was, to use the analogy that's in the Sharp Vajra of Conscious Awareness Tantra, the swallow entering its nest, the swallow who's examining all the features of a particular place. Is it going to build its nest here? And so a great part of my first year, even after years of study and years of discernment and years of passionate motivation, I was in retreat still asking, is Dzogchen the path or is Goya Samaja the path? And it's still no longer a dichotomy to me. But I'm saying both things, is that one needs to be prepared and one continues the preparation once in a state of retreat already. Go ahead. Oh, I can't hear you.
Mute. Beautifully said. Thank you so much. We have the next questions are around, can you say more? Basically, can you say more about Christianity and how it informs Buddhism and vice versa? And, then there's specific questions around, is Buddha nature, some sort of Christ consciousness, all these sort of questions are coming up. So maybe you can speak just generally to how you see the connections between your Buddhist practice and Christian practice.
the contradictions, the fundamental contradictions in the way the worldview is described, from, I'd say, a classical, and my own background is deeply Catholic, so I'm aware that my Christianity is a Catholic Christianity, and it might have different approach from many forms of Protestantism. But even a mystical Catholic view, and or Eastern Orthodox view, that posits God as creator God who is being and beyond being. I mean, frankly, the deepest theology is always transcending the idea of God as a being, a individual who made everything else. And it's that, actually, that Buddhism refutes. Shantideva, in the Patience chapter, ironically, he's refuting a certain idea of a creator God who's an individual among other individuals, basically a very high God being who would have made this world. But mystically in Christianity, if one can penetrate, even in the divine names, as in Pseudo Dionysius, where every positive statement is balanced by a negative statement, as in being, not being. Even I believe he goes as far as saying goodness, not goodness, love, not love, because those words can't encompass what the ground of all is. So by the time one's Christian mysticism has gone that far, I think it's a very short, what to say, the veil is, the shoji screen is very thin between the two worldviews. But then, in terms of, we've spoken of all-pervasive compassion and Nirmanakaya, to understand the incarnation of Jesus Christ as an individual person, who by Christians is believed to be completely divine, to be the divinity himself, is so very close to what a true idea of Nirmanakaya means. Not the same as Tuku from like reincarnation to reincarnation of a very advanced being, but Tuku, as in, that's the Tibetan word for Nirmanakaya, direct manifestation of the Buddha mind for the sake of others. But the specificity of Christ's acts, the self-giving love of the intention in his passion and death, is so utterly paradigmatic. I have to hesitate use the word paradigmatic in case it means symbolic, but it encompasses the bodhisattva intention to, by one's actions, whether for good or for ill, whether in joy or in suffering, to take on and purify the suffering of all sentient beings. It's like the epitome of that, and it's crystallized in a singularity in Christianity, whereas Buddhism emphasizes the manifold of the many bodhisattvas who have done this. And then in terms of the resurrection, I've thought about this a great deal, in terms of, do we dare, and of course Father Francis Tizo wrote a whole book on rainbow body and resurrection, and doing that research of, could we see the resurrection as a manifestation of rainbow body? For me, I don't actually need to see it correlate direct, as in, oh, it's this kind of rainbow body versus that kind of rainbow body. It's enough for me to believe that the manifestation of Christ's resurrected body to his disciples after his burial was indivisible emptiness and luminosity, manifesting, transcending the limitations of a mortal body, and showing forth the glory of what a Sambhogakaya, what a rainbow body looks like
Mm,
to those who had eyes to see.
mm.
So maybe that's enough to say for now, but
Thank you so much. That's a whole nother podcast, I think, that one. That was nice. We're at the end of our time and there's so many questions. Maybe we could try just a couple of like rapid fire just to see if people can get their questions answered. We're not, and I'm so sorry to everyone. We're not going to get through everyone's questions in the next 5 minutes, but I'm just going to pick a few ones that might be easy just to answer. So how do people get connected with the retreat center? If people want to do long-term retreat, where's the best place to go within the organization?
so Center for Contemplative Research.org is
Okay, well,
our website. I believe that's even in Śamatha and Vipaśanā in the book, but maybe if you can share that website. And I'll say, for those who are looking specifically in terms of retreat, there's a lot on our website that shows the overall vision. It's like it's the dream of how could our work in contemplation relate to science, and there are many dimensions to our vision. But for retreat, you go to Mind Labs and go down to retreat. And that's the page where you find the information about long-term retreat. And we have a rather detailed application. As of now, I'm still the main person reviewing those applications. Read a lot of them. And
you might get a few more after
yeah,
tonight.
no, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. And we're always I love to have applications 2, 3, 4 years out. We have some right now that are, planning retreats for 2027, 2028. And because of our um, cabin schedule right now, it's sometimes it needs that wait time. So then of course, there are many other retreat centers around the world, depending on where you are, where you can book to do a month, to do 2 months, to do 3 months. And I often highly recommend for someone who doesn't have a lot of retreat experience, just find a conducive place, do a retreat, keep in touch, and we'll talk after your retreat, or we'll correspond after your retreat. Because certainly in terms of long-term slots at the Center for Contemplative Research, the more retreat experience someone has coming in, the more confident we feel that they'll be able to do well in retreat.
That makes total sense. Um, so most of the questions, I'm sorry, are like so deep. The questions in themselves are so deep. I think we're going to just have to do another Dharma chat, I think is what we're going to have to do. But I'll pick one or two more. So there's someone who's writing in and he's saying he was more connected with the secular Buddhist movement, like from the likes of, say, Stephen Batchelor. And he's wondering how necessary do you find these ideas of ethereal realms and that to practice Buddhism?
Once one goes deep enough in emptiness, in understanding that reality is not what appears to us, or rather what appears to us does not exist in the way that it appears.
Hmm.
If you go deeply into the sections on obscurative and ultimate reality, closer to the beginning of this book, the first half, the possibility of worlds completely other than our own actually becomes logically reasonable. And that's really all I want to say is
Uh,
don't presuppose that those worlds don't exist. If the deeper you go into emptiness, the deeper you go into the indivisible union between emptiness and luminosity, you realize why worlds can appear from emptiness, because that's all you need. This emptiness and luminosity appears as a world, and there
yeah.
are cause and conditions behind that, different sentient beings. So just, yeah, open mind.
Open mind, keep practicing. I love it. So I think we're coming to the end of our time. Why don't you leave us with, is there anything else you wanted to leave us with as we close out the night? Any final thoughts here?
Courage, the courage to persevere through the layers of oneself. What I was starting to say earlier, I mean, there's so much I could say about that. That achieving stability of mind, realizing emptiness, even though there are references to blissful states of meditation accompanying those things, the goal can't be, I want to have really blissful meditations, because one won't be able to stick it out through the purification necessary. And so to be able to see that one's deepest flourishing, the deepest well-being can sometimes arise in moments of the most thorough stripping of everything one thought one was. And so it takes a kind of fearlessness and courage to say, yeah, I want to see that I don't exist in the way that I appear to myself. That means I am willing to let go of every memory I ever had, every experience, every conception I ever had of who I am, and release it. And some go easily, some go painfully. And I'm willing to persevere through that battle to the end until I find out who I really am. And to be willing to be who I really am doesn't have concepts. And that means that's not a body, and that's not a personality, and that's not a name. It's infinite expanse of luminous awareness. And to have the courage to dive into that ocean means oftentimes shifting our idea of what flourishing means. And of course, this is part of what Lama Alan was speaking about in the last one, of genuine well-being versus the well-being we get from the world of appearances, from the world of characteristics. So if your heart is breaking for sentient beings, have the courage to see you can't afford to be who you are anymore in order to become the bodhisattva who can actually be of benefit to countless sentient beings.
Here's to courage. It's such a inspiration what you all guys are doing, going into retreat courageously, and working through those layers and practicing. This is really, really a big inspiration to many. So thank you. It's been such a pleasure to have this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Daniel. And my love to all of you out there. Can we meet someday?
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you enjoyed that. We'll be coming up with a Dharma Chat coming soon with Serkong Rinpoche, I think is the next one. So stay tuned and look out for that. That one's going to be fun. All right, good night everyone. Have a good night and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.